Hello, brains. We're started, right? Okay. Yep. Yeah. You can already go ahead and ask questions. Just as Harley, our community manager, put it, put question at the start in brackets so that we can catch that for you. You can all see me, yeah?
Mhm.
Okay. Hello. So, hi. I'm super excited about this. I haven't done a live stream in a while because I've been busy writing the book, but that's about done. I'm turning in my second pass of layouts today. If I finish that, today is my deadline. I did not plan this well, but I'm really excited to be here today because I struggle with anxiety. I have an anxiety disorder, like a lot of people with ADHD do. Um, and I've really well accommodated my ADHD at this point. So the things that I'm noticing I'm still struggling with are really anxiety related. So I decided to have Dr. Sharon Saline come on to talk about that with us. And this is going to be super cool. Basically, I'm going to have her come on. We're going to talk about anxiety. I'm going to talk about my personal experience. She's going to talk about her experience with anxiety and do a short presentation about what anxiety is, give us a little more information about that. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So most of today is going to be us answering questions from the community about ADHD and anxiety or anxiety, social anxiety, anything like that that you want to ask. And yeah, we have moderators, our community manager Harley, and we've got some moderators in the chat that are going to be collecting your questions. Just try and put questions in or put question in brackets and then ask your question. You don't have to spam it. Just ask it one or maybe two, three times just to make sure that we catch it. And then I will go through and ask her as many questions as we can get through in the next hour and a half. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, let's see. Oh, see, I'm already going to ask questions. I have to pull up my question sheet so that I answer the questions that are questions that the moderators get. Okay, cool. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Sharon Saline. So Dr. Sharon Saline is, again, an expert on ADHD and anxiety. She's been doing this for a really, really long time. She has a couple books out, has so much to say, and is so passionate about this topic. I had the privilege of seeing her presentation at the International ADHD conference last year, and it was just phenomenal. I went to record just a couple minutes, here and there, and I ended up almost recording the entire thing in like 2-minute bits because it was just that good. I'd never met anybody who had understood anxiety so deeply and was
Mhm.
so passionate about it. It was just amazing to watch. So this is Dr. Saline.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here and be with you. And hello, everybody. I'm excited to meet you, your community, and have great conversations about my favorite topic. And you could say my best friend, anxiety.
So, my personal experience with anxiety, I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, I think, in high school, and then re-diagnosed as an adult, and then re-diagnosed as an adult. I think I've had an anxiety disorder most of my life at this point. Sometimes it's been bad enough that I need medication, but usually I can sort of keep it, to a dull roar with yoga, meditation.
Mhm.
Um, Massage helps me a lot. There's a few things that I do um to kind of help me with it, but it's kind of been a constant companion for me and just is always
Mhm.
kind of there in the background, to the point that when I don't have anxiety, it feels weird. I'm like, what's going on? um and I thought it was harmless, but it was actually Dr. Saline that explained that untreated anxiety can lead to depression. There are actual issues with having
Mhm.
anxiety besides being stressed out all the time. So, what's your experience with it?
Well, I think that like you, anxiety is is a constant companion. I like to joke that it's my best friend, but in a way, it is a friend because when anxiety is present, I know that something is amiss. Either I can't manage, or I don't believe that I can manage what's going on, or actually something is amiss, or it's sort of an overreaction or catastrophizing of what's going on. And so like you, I've been dealing with this for a long time. And actually, for most of my adult life, up until just a few years ago, I thought my major challenge was anxiety and that it wasn't ADHD. And in the recent research that's come out about women with ADHD and how issues like it struggles with emotional control and sometimes verbal impulse control and I kind of struggle with time management, that actually that that does qualify as a type of and having ADHD. And so I think that that was actually very illuminating for me. My brother has ADHD, and I grew up in a family where he wasn't diagnosed or treated until his son got diagnosed and treated. And so I think, we all run a little high on my family. And so that's what's led me to this work. And that's what's kept me here, because it's been so rewarding to work with people, to figure out how to live their fullest selves, whether they have anxiety or ADHD. As many of you may or may not know, I'm a clinical psychologist, an author, speaker, a consultant, and I'm really excited to be here. I have a website, www.drsharonsaline.com. It has lots of free resources for you. And like Jessica, but way smaller, I have a YouTube channel, and I'm on Facebook, of course, and I can't say it, but Twitter, as well as LinkedIn. Yeah.
I'm so excited to have you here because there's so many things that I guess anxiety was so normal for me that I didn't realize that it wasn't. I didn't realize that it was an issue, I guess, because it was just always present. Kind of like my
Mhm.
ADHD for a long time. I was like, oh, okay, I just suck at life. Like I'm just failing at life. I'm just like, okay, like I just am anxious all of the time. But the
Mhm.
insidious thing about anxiety is it's so self-reinforcing. Whereas my ADHD,
Right.
I'm like, okay, I don't want to forget the thing again. I just keep doing it. Anxiety is like, but I'm helping. Like,
Mhm.
because you were anxious about that thing, you were able to do it. Or because you were anxious about that thing, you checked 500 times and then you were able to, like,
Mhm.
realize that you actually didn't turn the oven off that one time out of a million. So, like, now I'm going to be anxious all the time when I leave the house and, remind you to check the oven.
Right.
But it feels like sometimes the anxiety comes out of the ADHD. Like the anxiety developed as a kind of a
Mhm.
coping or protective mechanism of like, I did make so many careless mistakes that now I'm anxious about that, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so I'm
Can I
excited.
say something? But I just want to say something about that because it's so important. So, what happens to a lot of people with ADHD or people who are neurodivergent is, we start out in our childhood, we're just doing the best we can, we're doing whatever, and then we get these messages. Oh, you missed this. Oh, you're too much. Oh, you forgot this, etc., etc. And these messages build up over time into a vigilance, and almost over time it becomes later a hypervigilance, where instead of being able to be present, you're asking yourself, when is the next time that the shoe is going to drop? When is the next time that I'm going to do something wrong, or I'm going to forget something? And we see this also with people who've lived with trauma. Like, when is the next time I'm going to do something and then I'll be in trouble for some reason I didn't know about? So we have to, if we're talking to adults or anyone who's listening on this channel right now, really understand that this pattern of anxiety developed naturally as a coping mechanism to help you avoid any kind of potential obstacles or humiliation. But over time it gets bigger, and what happens is that we don't pay attention to the ways in which we are succeeding, because anxiety is very skilled at erasing memories of success. And so we don't pay attention to those, and then our anxiety continues to grow.
Yeah. So to get everybody on the same page, I think you have a few slides about what is anxiety. Let's
Yes,
go to those slides.
sure.
And then for the community, I see some really great questions coming in already. So as soon as we're done with the slides, we can go ahead and go to questions.
Okay. So, what is anxiety? So, anxiety is experienced cognitively and physically. And there's the emotion of fear that's thrown in there as well. So, it's the trifecta. And so what happens is that we have our physiological brain back here that keeps us alive, heart rate, breathing, etc. We have our emotional brain here. That's the seat of the limbic system, the amygdala, also the hippocampus for memory. And then we have our thinking brain right here, the prefrontal cortex, which is the seat, sort of the director of the brain, right? It is the command center of our brain. So, what happens with anxiety is that people have mind, body, and emotion experiences. So, our senses pick up something in the field. And before we can even cognate it at all, these senses send this information to the hypothalamus, which basically, if there's any sense of danger, sends a message to the amygdala, and the amygdala gets revved up. It basically takes over running the brain, and the thinking brain kind of goes to the Bahamas for a little bit, and the amygdala is running the show. And when the amygdala is running the show, it's like, you have it's like it's a wild experience. You're in a car and it goes swerving everywhere. What we have to think about is how we can slow down the process of when the amygdala starts to take over. And so we want to think about this, because anxiety really is a manifestation of episodes of fear or worry in the absence of a genuine threat, although sometimes there might be a threat, but the response is disproportionate to it. And so anxiety reflects all or nothing thinking and a negative expectancy. Of course, as you said, the top predictor, interestingly, of depression in kids is untreated anxiety, often due to peer isolation. But we see in adults also that anxiety will lead to depression. Now, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is what's used for mental health diagnoses, specifically addresses anxiety as, quote, excessive worry and apprehensive expectations occurring for more days than not for at least 6 months about a number of different events or activities such as work or school performance or dating or going to a party or anything like that. How does anxiety work in the body? Well, I alluded to this a little bit before. We all receive information from our bodies, a physiological information, which are uncomfortable bodily states, cognitive information, which is, that worried thinking, and psychological belief information, which are these distorted beliefs. Now, we know that anxiety can be adaptive and help prepare our bodies for danger. But with anxiety today, instead of the tigers in the jungle, what we see are more often false alarms, episodes of fear or worry in the absence of something to be concerned about. It's 10 p.m. and we get an email from our boss, hey, I'd like to have a meeting tomorrow. And boom, we're back in the jungle. We're collecting our berries. The tiger is 50 feet away, and we're running as fast as we can back to our cave. When really, they could be like, hey, that meeting could actually be like, hey, I'm really excited and proud of what you did on this project. But we don't go there because our sympathetic nervous system reacts with fright or flight or or freezing. And so when this when the amygdala takes over, when it's sort of really kind of comes out, what happens is there's a rush of adrenaline and cortisol and in our bodies, that make us feel like we are in maybe a panic attack, where our palms might tighten or become very sweaty, the digestion slows down, so we can feel nauseous or otherwise engaged in the bathroom. We might feel, we might clench our teeth. There's all kinds of things that we do physically. And there's a difference between real danger, like I'm crossing the street and boom, that car turned the corner really fast. I better jump back, which our thinking brain cannot handle faster than our amygdala, by the way. Or there's a teeny small spider that's like this big and it's crawling 6 feet away on the ceiling, and I know it's going to come down and bite me and I'm going to die. So, what we have to do when we live with anxiety is distinguish between these different kinds of perceptions. And that's where we get stuck. We know that anxiety rarely travels alone in adults. According to excuse me, according to Attitude Magazine, but also the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, 50% of adults with ADHD have a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. 50%. And you could easily say another bunch of them. I'm not going to give a number and then be wrong, but another bunch of us just live with a lot of anxiety. Depression, 20 to 50%, and you can see the numbers from there. Particularly for women, there's a history of mood disorder diagnosis and anxiety, or hormonal issues, instead of actually considering whether or not ADHD would be in that mix. Um, when we're diagnosing anxiety, what we want to think about is, how are we going to differentiate between ADHD and anxiety? So we want to think about, is a person's response to a situation seem typical or atypical for their age and or situation? Including, what's happening in society. Is the reaction out of proportion to the actual danger? What is the frequency and consistency of these concerns and behaviors? That's one of the key distinguishing factors between sort of everyday garden variety anxiety and an anxiety disorder. And what is happening at home that could be contributing to their emotional and behavioral states? Um,
Right, because sometimes you're anxious because there's a reason to be anxious, not because your brain's making stuff up.
Exactly, exactly, but we have to understand, I'm anxious, my daughter-in-law is giving birth to twins, like, normal people would be anxious during that day, versus I'm anxious, because, what if the babies wake up at night and, someone's in the bathroom? Like, something, silly like that. So, my friend Dr. Marcy Caldwell has talked about the stages of emotional intensity. And what I really want to say here is that flooding, which is what happens when the amygdala takes over, when we just have these thoughts that will not go away. It's a result of emotional regulation issues from living in a world that's not designed for neurodivergent brains, right? And so the lack of filters in neurodivergent or ADHD brains for internal and external stimulation combines with a full-on switch. So when feeling comes into awareness, you're flooded. You can be flooded by it. Limited coping strategies due to executive functioning challenges can lead to increased emotional disorganization, like physical cleanliness disorganization, and of course, all kinds of other reactions, yelling, dysregulation, crying, etc. And so when we're thinking about how we're going to deal with anxiety, what we want to think about is the pattern more than the content, because the content of anxiety changes. Anxiety is a fantastic shapeshifter. And so if you're like, oh, okay, I got this problem solved, whew, you're in the weeds, you're figuring it out, I got it solved, boom, nope, I'm good. And then, like, maybe one day later, you're anxious again. Why? Because it's another problem, and you're reacting. You're doing the same process of responding to that. And what we want to do is change the process of how we respond to things. And I'm going to tell you that this is not easy. I mean, part of the reason that I'm so fascinated by anxiety is because I live with it. And I live with people who live with it. And I love people who live with it. And so, it's very difficult when you're in high alert, you're level 3, you have a total focus on your feeling and the reason for it. It's impossible to ignore, and you're flooded, to actually back it down. And we're going to talk about how to do that today. I did want to just throw this slide in terms of a differential diagnosis between ADHD and anxiety. It is, ADHD symptoms primarily affect focus, concentration, impulse and emotional control. It's ADHD is a condition of sort of emotional dysregulation and troubled self-regulation, troubles with self-regulation. When we think about that, the word really is metacognition. How do we evaluate ourselves in time and space and relationships? So anxiety, though, is persistent distress, unease, or fear in situations, regardless of whether they're benign or dangerous. The shared symptoms include difficulties with concentration, distractibility, trouble relaxing, feeling restless, and magnifying the severity of issues. Um, so, I have to just read this quote from a 19-year-old that I have, which is says, "I worry about things I have to do and I will forget them. Then I totally feel panically because there's something I think I need to be doing, but I can't remember what. Hopefully, me thinking about it and keeping it in my head makes me do it. Otherwise, if it's not in my head, it doesn't exist." And I imagine many of you can understand that, but that's also a little bit of a recipe for disaster, because if it's in your head and nothing else exists, then there's a kind of perseverative, or what some of you might say, obsessive quality to that. So, what are the traits of anxiety? So, the traits of anxiety are scanning for threats, wondering if you're going to be safe or secure, catastrophizing.
Mhm.
A small concern becomes enormous and impossible. It's like it went from being like a pebble to Mount Everest in about 3 seconds. What if thoughts and worries. And these are usually, what if something bad happens? And we'll talk a little bit about how to deal with those what if thoughts, because we want to train, we tend to think of what if something bad will happen. And what I've started to ask myself and my clients and to teach is, what could go right? Because we don't ask that question.
No.
Um, then there are a few things like reduced self confidence and increased overwhelm, and interpreting predictions as fact. I think this will happen, so it's definitely going to happen. Um, we also know that children of anxious parents are more likely to be anxious and to perceive ambiguous situations as threatening. So, if you come from people who are anxious and you yourself are a little anxious, give yourself a break. You come by it naturally. Um, I do want to just say a few things about what the difference is between nervousness, worry, and anxiety. Nervousness is an uncertainty that diminishes when a skill is learned. So I'm nervous about, driving to this school. I've never been to that school to speak. I'm a little nervous that I'll get there on time, etc. And then, but once I figure out how to get to the school, I'll be fine. Or once I've driven to the school, I'll be fine. Worry is expecting a negative outcome. It's how we think about something. And anxiety is a physical response based on over responding to a fear or worry. There are two types of worries that lead to anxiety: productive worry. And my goodness, this has gotten me through so many things and gotten me to finish so many things. And it's worry about doing things that can be really motivating. And then poisonous worry, which is worry about things you can't control and is debilitating. I do want to say one thing, in support of people like me who worry, and maybe like you. We are good. We are good planners. We're creative thinkers. We have sort of unusual ways of seeing things, and sometimes our future focused concerns can be very helpful in creating something beautiful, like a graduation party, or a wonderful trip or something like that. When we're managing anxiety, so we're going to talk more about this at length, but we want to notice that reaction, and to the worry, because we're not going to eliminate the worry. People say, how can I get rid of my anxiety? I say, you can't. It's how you're wired. It's kept us alive for centuries and centuries, and more than that, millennia. We want to learn how to turn down the volume on the noise of the worry, right? So we're going to have to step back and see how the anxiety is operating. So, first, we're going to identify bodily signals that let you know you're feeling a little triggered. What are those? They're different for everyone. For me, I get a little tightness in my chest. How about for you, Jess? What do you get?
I'm taking so many notes right now. It's usually in my stomach. Like my anxiety is almost always like right in
Yeah.
my belly. And when I was in high school, I remember like I had a lot of digestive issues because of the anxiety that I was constantly feeling.
That's common. But I think it's important if you can identify for yourself what are the ways that you're getting that physiological, biological signal that you're starting to head on that path that I talked about, the baseline and et cetera, level one and so forth.
Yeah, for me
So,
it's like a tightening in my stomach, and sometimes like I like it's in my arms, like and I think I almost drowned as a kid, and so
wow.
I kind of feel like moving my arms, like my arms start to get antsy, and I don't know if that's related, but I had a trauma therapist once tell me that yeah, like certain experiences and what you needed to do to get out of that situation sometimes can impact where in your
Mm,
body you experience anxiety later on.
I think that's really true. That was a wise person. When we feel anxious, it means that we don't think that we're in a situation where we don't think that we have the internal skills to manage it. And so we need to learn these skills. We know that life is impossible to live without feeling uncomfortable. So we have to develop a sense of competency or learn how to ask for the help we need.
Yeah.
And this is so um, so we're going to try to change our relationship to worry and treat it with some like with some Sherlock Holmes medicine. So instead of being surprised every time you're anxious or hating yourself for being anxious or hating your anxiety, let's lighten up a little bit and let's expect to worry. Worry says blah 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 and you can't handle it. Okay? Anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of the resources to deal with it. Let's just sit with that for a minute. Okay. An overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of the resources you have to deal with it. So you're gonna work together with someone, a coach, a therapist, a good friend, your journal, to create solutions that reduce the power and influence of your worry. We have to brainstorm things to say back to the worry when it rears its ugly head, right? So one of my clients, described their worry as something that's a big inflatable that goes all the way up to the sun. And I said, "Well, what is the part of you that can talk back to that?" And she said, "Oh, it only comes up to its ankle." He said, "I guess we have some work to do." She said, "Yes." So what we want to do is start to focus on what we do want, not what we don't want, right? So we want to recall a time when you were afraid of something. You met the challenge successfully. You did it anyway. What steps did you use to do that? Because one situation is different from another, but there are parallels in terms of how you approach it and how you manage it yourself. Okay. Um, the learning process happens over time by reminding yourself and the people around you, if you're a parent watching this is for your kids, of the ways that you've succeeded in the past in spite of worry. Okay. So the goal is going to be I want to do this live with Jessica. So I'm willing to be a little nervous beforehand because this is something I have never done before. I've never done this. Next time, I probably won't be so nervous. God willing, there's a next time. And 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 it's important. I want this, and so I'm willing to do this. And the willing part can be really small. You don't have to take on a big thing, just a small step. How are we going to do this small step? Okay. Well, we're going to name the worry. and we're going to empathize with it. Of course, you're nervous before doing this live with Jessica. Anybody would be nervous. That's okay. Right? Instead of turning to people around me to validate, excuse me, to reassure me, like calling them and say, how do you think I'm going to do on this thing with Jessica? I'm really nervous, and increasing the nervousness, I am going to say to myself, yes, you're nervous. And even someone on my team said, you'll do great because you're going to go with the flow. And I thought, you know what? That's true. I do that. Probability. Probability can be helpful. What is actual probability that what I'm worried about is going to happen? What is the probability that I'm going to fail this thing, or I'm going to, embarrass myself? Maybe I've embarrassed myself, 3 times out of the last 6. Well, that means 3 times you didn't embarrass yourself when you were in a group. So let's talk about those. How did that happen? And I said earlier, best case, worst case scenario. So you can say, what if, and get something negative. And what I would say to you is, and then is that what I would say to you to say to yourself is, and then what?
Yeah, that
And
actually, sorry, I have to interrupt because like that's the only thing that helped
interrupt.
me when I was going through my like really contentious divorce, where I was like concerned that my ex was gonna like take my business, take my channel, and make it so that I couldn't do this work anymore. I was really scared about that, and I there was so much uncertainty and no way for me to resolve it. And so what finally helped me not be on edge constantly, because I actually did start to fall into a depression. The anxiety got so bad and it was
Mhm.
about stuff I couldn't control that I started to get depressed about it.
Mhm.
And so the only thing that ended up helping me was going, okay, what is actually the worst case scenario here? And how
Mhm.
am I going to get through that? And when I realized like the worst case scenario was like he got the company, he got the channel and everything, and I could start a new channel and like I would be okay. At least some people would follow me to the new channel. I was okay. But I really did have to think, okay, what if? What if the worst case happens?
Mhm.
How
Yeah.
will it be okay?
It's so important to do that, Jessica, because I call that following it down the what if line. So you just follow it to its end. And, you either, you'll realize, well, actually, it'll be fine because people will follow me, or, you know, I have someone I can lean on, or sometimes people say, "Well, I'll be dead, so who cares anyway?" And we start laughing, and because we know that that's not the case, so that's great. And I think the other thing we want to do is to do a best case scenario, like what could go right. What's the best case scenario? It's harder to hold on to that for people who are anxious. That takes a lot more. Sturdiness, and the sturdiness that I'm talking about is what we're going to build over time by doing things like, I want this, so I'm willing to try that, or I'm willing to risk that. The other thing that we want to think about is, talking to our loved ones and our community and teaching them how to say this. You're right to be scared, you're right to be nervous, you're not sure you can handle it. It's natural to worry in this situation, because what our loved ones and caring community, what they do is they say, "Oh, you don't worry, you'll be fine."
That's
Or
the natural instinct, right? I have anxiety and I know it doesn't work for me because then my anxiety is like, but here's why you're wrong. But I still do it to other people. I still want to reassure them. It's just that it's the natural instinct is to want to tell
right.
people like, no, you got this. Like you're gonna be fine. But that's not the way to handle it, right? Because that could
No,
actually make
what
it
we
worse.
want to do is validate. Of course you feel this way. Anybody would feel this way in this situation. It's natural to worry.
Or
Um,
anybody would feel this way given the things that you've experienced, because there's sometimes where I'm
exactly.
like, I look at my boyfriend who is autistic and ADHD, and I sometimes like see the things that he's worried about and I'm like, it doesn't feel like something that anybody would worry about, but then I remember his history of being in social situations and like
Mhm.
saying the wrong thing and getting literally yelled at or whatever. And it's like, okay, of course you're feeling anxiety about this social situation when you miss social cues and you have this experience or whatever. Of course you're feeling anxious. So I've started trying to do that.
That's really amazing. I think that's so important. And you're right. When you have a history of trauma, and many people with ADHD have trauma because many people have trauma, but also many people with ADHD have the trauma of a thousand paper cuts. The little ways in which, and the big ways in which people have put them down or bullied them, or excluded them for being who they are. And so, really, that's why it's so important to do that process of validation. And the reality is sometimes we have to fake it till we can make it. You know, I'm that's part of coping with nervousness. Like I'm really worried about this, but I am going to try. I am going to go to this hiking group because I really want to meet other hikers and see what happens. So that thank you very much for listening. This is a copy of my downloadable gift, and I have a couple of them. So you'll I'm hoping that you'll go to my link right here, and Jessica has shared that, and that's where you'll get this gift. And then once I have your email, this is how we can connect in the future. You'll be, automatically get my blog, which comes about twice a month. Don't worry, I don't like to overdo it with the inbox stuff. And you'll also have an opportunity to get a free gift in a few days. So I hope that you'll join me and my community and check out this downloadable. It's a really easy and concise way for you to hold on to what we talked about today. That
Yeah,
is
so
the
that's in the description as well. So, the description of this video, and then we'll also post it. Yeah, there we go. Harley, our community manager, there has the link for you there, so you can just click on that. Yeah, I already am subscribed to her newsletter, and it's fantastic.
Thank you. All
And yes,
right.
this will be available after the live as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. That's it for the information presentation part. And now I'm really excited just to chat with you, Jess, and just wanted to make sure that we all had some background information because one of the things that really helps people with anxious minds is information.
Yeah, it's so accurate. Thank you so much. That was really informational. I've seen you talk before and I still learned more things. So thank you so much for sharing all that. And we have a ton of questions already coming in. So let me start with those questions. Um, so someone asks, can social anxiety be a symptom of ADHD or is it a comorbidity?
Well, generally, social anxiety is not a symptom of ADHD. It's more of a comorbidity. We see about Thomas Brown says about a third of adults with ADHD have social anxiety. I've had a little trouble replicating and finding the source for that number. I think it's from his Smart But Stuck book. But the numbers are pretty high and they're higher than they are in the general population for sure. So, but generally it's not a symptom of ADHD per se.
Okay. On that note, with social anxiety, someone asked, I enjoy engaging in social activities, but I struggle with impulsiveness, hyperactivity, clumsiness, which sometimes results in misunderstandings and social mishaps. This causes me anxiety and sometimes leads me to avoid participating. How can I
Mm.
manage these tendencies and feel more at ease in social situations?
Such a great question. I think there are a few ways to approach this. First of all, when you're in a social situation and it makes you a little bit nervous, is to slow down, to actively, slow down, make choices that are, instead of making a lot of different choices, just try to focus on one thing at a time, as hard as that may be. Um, I think it would also be great to come up with a phrase for yourself when you've done something that's impulsive, and you're like, "Oops, I did it again," or something like that, so that you can laugh with yourself about it, so that will relax other people around it too. We don't want you to stop doing these things and going to these things. So, what we want is for you to be able to feel better about yourself when you're there. And so that's something that I think is worth talking about, Jess, if we're going to talk a little bit about social anxiety, which is this underlying trait, which is part of the definition of social anxiety, that there's a core sense of deficiency. It's so
Yeah.
hard to even say, because it makes me sad. But this core sense of deficiency that many people who have social anxiety have, and many people who have ADHD have anyway. And so this is why we see so much social anxiety going on and occurring with ADHD.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Someone asks, would you please be able to discuss the intersection of symptoms of ADHD and or anxiety and ASD? and how to cope with that.
Sure. So we know when we think about the neuro, so let's take a step back. So in the late 60s, a sociologist basically defined something called neurodivergence and neurotypicality, and all under this umbrella of neurodiversity. I can't remember her name right now. Sorry. Um, so we know that neurodivergence covers people with ADHD, people with learning disabilities, people who are on the spectrum, mostly level one autism, and people who are twice exceptional. So what happens, there's a fundamental difference between ADHD and ASD, and here's what I want to say. About 50% of people who have a diagnosis of ASD have ADHD co-occurring. But 14% of people whose primary diagnosis is ADHD have a diagnosis of ASD. The differences that we see have to do with in how people fundamentally understand social nuances and social interactions and communication. And when those traits, the traits that we typically expect are lacking, they lead to a diagnosis of ASD. People with ADHD learn how to take turns. They just may not remember. They learn how to greet people or interact in a social environment, but they might be too overwhelmed by a particular excitement about dinosaurs to be able to talk in relate to what's going on in the group. So what we see for people have this profile of ADHD and ASD and anxiety is a real struggle with being able to connect with others, having that longing, but feeling like I don't know what to do. I don't know how to have a conversation. And on top of that, I don't feel good about myself. So again, I want you to think about starting really small, like maybe starting by going to a cafe and just saying hi to the person who makes your coffee. And then the next day, going back and saying hi. And then the next day, going back and saying hi. And maybe in a week, you could say, hey, how is your day going? But have very small expectations for yourself. And you know that Caroline McGuire, excuse me, has done a lot of work on how to have conversations and make friends. And I've talked a lot about this myself. And so it's really about being able to be present with what's going on rather than stuck in the loops in your mind about what's wrong with you and what's bad about you.
Yeah, lowering the bar is helpful. I've noticed for myself too, even with just ADHD, is there were a lot of times where I was put in social situations where I was playing a level of the social game that I just wasn't ready for. I didn't
Mm,
know how to interact with my peers in, at the level that I was expected to by that age because of the neurodevelopmental delay and because of my impulsivity and
mhm,
hyperactivity and, all inattention, getting distracted and like I understood social cues, but I missed them sometimes, or I
mhm,
misinterpreted them because I was like, well, it's because of me that they are angry or whatever.
mhm,
So, like setting the expectations, going, okay, like you don't usually jump into a video game at level 27 and expect that to go well. So, like starting at the lower levels is like usually really helpful. Which I'm going to be doing. I'm actually talking to Caroline McGuire. I'm going to fly up to meet with her in Boston next week, and we're going to do an episode about all of my difficulties with socializing and all the anxiety that goes with that. And we're going to talk about we're going to talk about ways to cope with that. So,
Well, but I think you said something, Jessica, that I just want to go back to is you understood, but you
mhm,
missed the cues. That's the typical challenge in terms of social anxiety for people with ADHD.
yeah, yeah. um, let's see. So okay, someone asked, thank you, by the way. Somebody donated. I appreciate it. It helps us do more things like this. I'm usually great at pulling myself out of anxiety and depression ruts, and now both are severe. Um,
Mhm,
Evaluation scale, along with ADHD, and been having breakdowns and feeling burnt out, especially being a twice exceptional kid. Oh, they wanted to know, can it be due to ADHD and comorbidities and burnout and breakdowns? Twice exceptional mentioned because he was smart and masked enough to never need help. Had to leave job due to imposter syndrome. Yeah, can this be due to ADHD and comorbidities, burnout, and breakdowns? I had to leave work last Thursday and miss Friday because of breakdowns. So there's a lot to unpack there. Does that make sense?
Yes, there's a lot to unpack. I think that yes, the answer is yes. You know, ADHD and comorbidities are serious. You know, I mean, most people are referred for counseling because of the comorbidities, and so I think that. And what happens is that these comorbidities, whether it's mood disorders or something, are exacerbated because of having ADHD, um, because of the executive functioning challenges that go along with it. So you're a little upset, but you express it as something very big. You are not able to plan and prioritize how to get this project done for work, and you're up till 4 a.m. the day it's due, and it's not your best work. So I think these things go together, and particularly for children with ADHD who don't, whose brains are really in the process of developing, because the brain develops from the back to the front and the inside out. And the last part to develop is our prefrontal cortex, coalescing around age 25 in neurotypical brains, and with about a 3-year delay in people with ADHD. So you'll have kids who are 10, but they act in some ways like they're 7. And then it's confusing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. um, so how does anxiety affect the relationship between brains and hearts? So brains are, usually people with ADHD and other executive function challenges that are here to learn about their brain. Hearts are those who care about us, who support us, who maybe don't
Mhm.
have a neurodevelopmental condition, especially when an MIA situation occurs and burnout has happened. So I'm guessing like by MIA, they mean like missing in action, meaning I'm now sticking my head in the sand and avoiding you because I'm
Uh,
super anxious. And that
mhm,
can perpetuate, right? Like,
mhm,
I didn't answer you yesterday. And so now, like, I also have a wall of awful around answering you today because now I have to make up for
mm,
the fact that I didn't answer you yesterday. So,
yeah.
how does anxiety affect the relationship between brains and hearts?
That's a great question. So, I think one of the things that happens is that when you live with anxiety, you're searching for safety and security. And you're searching for safety and security everywhere. And you're not sure where you're going to get it or when you're going to get it. And if one of your hearts might somehow have said something to you that didn't feel comforting or was distressing, it's likely to either pull away in avoidance, or to pursue in sort of an aggressive kind of way, to fight, to argue. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do as people with anxiety is to talk to the people we love about what we need when we're feeling anxious. Because when people are anxious, what they need is a plan to soothe themselves. We can't expect people to soothe us. Now, this is what happens a lot of times, both in adult relationships and with kids. People will export their feelings onto the other person. Like, I feel bad here. Let me yell at you, or let me tell you how horrible I am, or what's wrong with you, or blah, blah, blah. And then we are in the import business. And so we take all that on, and then we're now feeling doubly worse, because not only are we anxious about this thing, but now we've upset this person, or we're feeling worse than we did before we said anything. So it's really complicated.
Oh my God, I relate to that. Let's see. This kind of similar. Like back when I was actively in college, I found I have paralyzing anxiety that delays my studying and worsens the quality of my work. How might
Mhm.
I go about improving that?
Well, this is really great. I mean, I didn't really talk about this much, but of course, procrastination is a form of anxiety. It's obviously a difficulty initiating is part of having ADHD because of the lower levels of dopamine, which has to do with, interest and motivation and pleasure and reward. Um, but anxiety is also, a strong component of procrastination. And there are 3 types of procrastination: perfectionistic procrastination. I have to get it right, or I can't do it at all, or I'm really motivated to get it right and I'm working on it, and it looks good, but oops, it's not finished. So I mean, oops, excuse me, it's not finished in the way I would like it to be. So therefore, I cannot turn it in. Avoidance. I hate this. I'm not doing it. It looks like Mount Everest. Forget it. And productive, which is I'll do other things that make me feel better, and but not the real thing. And so what happens is with when we talk about managing procrastination, we have to talk about two things. One, treating ourselves with more kindness. Okay, you're struggling because you don't have the tools to do what you have to do or the resources. You don't feel confident in it. So we want to break things down into small chunks. And the smaller the better, because if you still can't get started, then it's not small enough. And then what we want to do is to say, okay, I was able to start this. So what would be so I actually can do it. So now let's think a little bit maybe bigger about what else needs to be done to work on it.
Yeah, people are relating. Crass folk says, is Sharon watching me right now?
No, but I'm with you.
Yeah, she gets it, I think is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, how do you work towards self-soothing? Like how do you learn how to self-soothe, especially when you're anxious 99% of the time?
I am so glad you asked this question. Like, I'm so glad. So, so let's start with something. How many of you, when you're upset or you've made a mistake, talk to yourself in a way that you would never talk to anybody else?
Yeah.
So we're mean to ourselves. And I like to say, if you wouldn't say it to a third grader with a skin knee, why would you say it to yourself? And so that's where we want to start with self soothing, which is with mindful self compassion. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Kristen Neff and Christopher Gomer and their work, but this is really I've spent some time studying that. And what I feel very strongly is that if people with ADHD want to manage their anxiety, then they have to start with self compassion because we're upset with ourselves that we have this. So how do we create self-soothing? Okay, the first thing is make a list. Think about it, talk about it with somebody. What are things that you do that make you feel better? Is it exercise? Is it just stepping outside and breathing the fresh air? Because not everybody has time to go for a 5-mile run when you're in the middle of something, like at work or in school or something. Listening to music. I have 2 or 3 playlists on my phone that are like, okay, happy music, semi-happy music, whatever. I'm working out now. So have a playlist. One of my clients, I mean, I've done this with people of all ages. One of my clients was like, I want to go under my bed with my flashlight and read my book because her bed was like way off the ground. Somebody else wanted to pet their cat. Somebody else wanted to sit on the couch with their mother and have them read a story or two. Um, uh, Make a cup of tea, whatever it is, take a hot bath, do some yoga. You can go on and on. What is your list? I know
Uh,
that.
Sorry, making a list is such a great idea because in the moment, I think we just have our go-tos, and if I haven't already thought about it, I'm not going to be able to think about it in the moment because my anxiety is too high, right? Which it's shutting down cognition. So, um it sounds awful, but like for a long time, and it's still something that I struggle with sometimes. um if I was anxious, I would get mad at whatever was making me anxious. Like
Mhm.
somebody
Yeah.
changed something on me, and so now I'm mad at them because like I had my day planned and now like there's uncertainty, and it's their fault,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
um and so I would get mad, instead of go, oh, okay, this is me being anxious, let me self-soothe, let me go, okay, my day got disrupted, let me make myself a cup of hot tea and like hold it in my hands. It was just that instant. And by the way, this combines with the emotional impulsivity that people with
Mhm.
ADHD have, where we feel something and we have that raw reaction and we are reacting before we have really time to think about it or slow down.
Mhm. Absolutely, like, you have this feeling and it takes off and it becomes the whole it's not like it's not it it's it becomes like, um the whole purpose, not just a feeling. I think, I'm curious, Jess, where would you put your list? Like some people, I think, need to put it on their phone or in the refrigerator or on 7 Post-its in 7 different areas. Like, where would you put yours?
Honestly, I would probably hand it to my partner and tell him, like, when I'm anxious, feel free to hand this to me because
Um,
because often, like, I will go to my partner
mhm,
to, to soothe, right? So I'll be like, I'm really stressed out about this thing. And so if and it's taxing for him because he has autism, and so like and alexithymia, and emotions are loud for him. And he also
mhm,
cares really, really deeply. And so it's distressing for him to see me like that. And so it gives him something to do, and it puts it in a place where I can, it's like my go-to place when I'm anxious. And so I think it would be probably good for both of us. There are
mhm,
other places I could put it around, like on a fridge or whatever, but I'm honestly not sure that I would see it in the moment
mhm,
because that's,
mhm.
well, I don't know. Sometimes I go to the fridge when I'm anxious, so maybe that would help.
It's just worth thinking about for people. I keep mine on my phone as something to go to. But I also am like, I have a go to in my head: one, two, and three. So one is take a walk, two is listen to some music, three is do like break out a downward dog or just bend over or someplace where or stretch or something like that. Those things help me in the moment when I'm in public. So I'm not doing alternate nostril breathing, in the middle of a meeting, which looks a little
Ah.
weird. I've worked with people. I came up with this what I call triangle breathing, which is, and we can do it now actually, which is breathe in for 4. So everybody breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 6. And I'll do it again with you once more and I'll count. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what happens is that when we do that several times, that longer exhale helps us slow the system down. And that's really the goal here, because I don't know about you, Jess, but like when my husband tells me you need to calm down, I become the three-headed monster. I'm like, don't tell me what to do. I hate when you tell me what to do. Um, and so, he said, well, what am I supposed to say when you're acting ridiculous? I'm like, A, I don't act ridiculous. And B, just how about, I think this, maybe you need to like, this is a good time to slow down. I can sort of hear that. And
Yeah.
I'm only like a two-headed monster.
And the breathing, I do something called box breathing, which is you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you saw this. I did an episode called oh god, I forget what it's called. I did a vlog about how I went on this hike and went waterfall rappelling, and I had this
Mhm.
moment of sheer terror, and I was
Mhm.
like, "It's okay, I know how to handle it. It's box breathing." And then I was like, "I don't remember how to box breathe," and I was freaking out. And the instructor gets down close to me and he says, "Hey," like he's talking to a small child, and it
Mhm.
was like he's talking to a third grader with a skin knee. It was great, and he goes, "Hey, this is scary, not dangerous. It's scary, not dangerous." And he just kept repeating it
I
over and over
love
again.
that. I
I thought you'd
love
like it
that.
until I was like, "It's scary, not dangerous." And I'm at the top of a waterfall about to rappel down and freaking out, not because of heights, but because I he just told me that I'm now in charge of my own safety, like my own rappelling stuff.
Yeah.
This time he's going to meet me halfway down, so I have to do some stuff myself. And because I have ADHD and careless mistakes is part of the diagnostic criteria, I was like, "Oh god, I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to mess, all these like,
Mhm.
and then I'm going to like die, like I'm going to fall down this waterfall and die, all the catastrophizing everything, but
Yeah.
going, knowing that there were safeties in place and this is scary, not dangerous. That was really helpful for me. So I wanted to share that too with
I
self-soothing.
love that. This is scary, not dangerous. I'm gonna have to write that down, because it's perfect. And again, we're looking at for how to reassure ourselves, right? Because we'll turn to other people. That's just like a natural thing that we do. And I think that's because when we were kids, that's what we did. We turned to the adults around us.
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like it's a good first step. Like if I am used to turning to my partner for, when I'm anxious, like say, having him hand me a list, like cool, but do it yourself. Like it's a good, like it's scaffolding, right? And
Right.
eventually maybe I go get the list myself. But at first it might be too much for me to try and get to the list myself, you know?
Mhm.
So
Yeah. I can't, yeah, I think that's really good. I mean, there are a lot of breathing things people can do. I also like alternate nostril breathing from yoga. That can be very helpful.
Yeah. Um, gosh, there's so many questions, so I wanna get to some more. How can we recognize comorbid anxiety with ADHD? Because ADHD does come with a certain level of anxiety just in general, but, like, how do you know if there's an anxiety disorder?
If you have excessive worry,
How do you know what excessive is, though? Like, what are you comparing that to?
if you are I mean, I think that's a really great question. I mean, I would say someone would compare it to someone who isn't a worrier. I mean, like, who are these people? I
So you
don't.
just ask people, you're like, "Hey, how often do you worry about, the heat death of the universe?" And then
No, I mean, I think it's like when you feel like you're bogged down all the time with worry, that would be a good sign. Because it's rather than having like like be having worry about like an occasional event or something like, oh, I'm getting on an airplane, I am really not super comfortable flying, but when I'm living the rest of my life, I don't think about that, or I'm not worried about transportation. So we want to sort of think about that idea that it's pervasive and it's more than you feel like you can, that it's more than you would like it to be. Like, maybe that would be a good place to start. Like, it's too much, it's an overwhelm.
yeah. Somebody in the chat had a good one, like, worrying that prevents you from doing what you want or need to do as well, like, if
Hmm.
it's starting to interfere with your daily life.
Hmm. Yeah, worrying that's excessive, that you can't be who you want to be in the world or do the things you want to do.
Yeah. I love this question. How do you combat anxiety when what you were worried about happening does come true?
Mm. Being specific. So I think, you're worried about something and it actually happens that way. Sometimes that occurs. So first of all, we want to think about the sometimes rule. Sometimes things occur that way, sometimes they don't. And that is a level of just what it's like to live in the world, the sometimes rule. I think the second thing is to be very specific. I was worried about this specific thing, and this specific thing happened. That doesn't mean when I'm worried about another thing, that thing will happen.
Yeah. No, that's a good
Because
point.
what anxiety will do is it'll say, "Oh, this happened in situation A, so it's of course going to happen in situation B," which may not be the case.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for situational anxiety? So this is another repeat that's been asked a few different ways. So I'm guessing by situational anxiety, like anxiety that's specific to a situation. So like I
Mhm.
have anxiety. Let's say people are noticing the patterns. Like I always have a lot of anxiety when I'm going to a party with a group of people that I don't know, or I always have anxiety when about to go on a plane.
Mm. So again, the thing isn't about so much the anxiety, it's how we're responding to the anxiety. So the thing what we want to look at is what do I notice is going on? So what are those bodily triggers that I'm feeling? What do I want to see happen? And what am I willing to do to try to make that happen? Rather than the carrying over behaviors from it, sort of unhelpful and ineffective behaviors from one situation to another. And so what we want to do is to be able to say, to keep things as something happened in this situation and there's another situation, and the two situations may seem completely different, but the process of worrying is pretty much the same, right? The process of worrying is like, something is what worry is saying, blah, 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 and you can't handle it.
That's a good
So
point. Okay, so when you're talking about recognizing the patterns, you're not talking about, oh, I tend to be anxious about this type of thing. You're saying when I'm anxious, I tend to go through these steps.
exactly. When I'm anxious, I do these things.
Ah,
So when I'm anxious, um, I um, I doubt myself. When I'm anxious, I get a lot of information from other people because that just to see what they have to say because that makes me feel better. Or when I'm anxious, I do deep dives online, which probably I shouldn't do because that information may or may not be correct. When I'm anxious, I doubt that I doubt my skills, I doubt my intelligence, I doubt my coping mechanisms. See that those are the things that we have to understand so that we can then create something else. Right? So we have a voice in our head that says, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. Whatever that negative, anxious voice is saying. And then we have another voice that's actually gotten us through many situations and is saying, oh, you know what? I think I could do this. There is a part of me that is capable. But usually the negative is a lot bigger and has a lot more strength and power than that positive, you know, ally.
Well, thank you. That's
It's
actually
not
really
really an ally. It's that positive part. You know, it's these parts of ourselves.
yeah, that's actually really helpful, and something I think I'm gonna try is just, kind of doing some CBT on it where I track
Mhm,
like, okay, when I'm anxious, when I'm feeling anxious, what are my thoughts and what's my behavior? And I'm going to try tracking
mhm,
that for a little bit because it
mhm.
doesn't feel like there's a pattern there, but I'm sure there is. But I think it's because it's, it is a shapeshifter, right? Like now I'm anxious about this and now I'm anxious about this and it doesn't feel related, but there
Yes.
probably is a pattern with with that and an underlying fear, which like I discovered when waterfall rappelling, the fear is I'm going to mess up and that's going to be bad. Like I'm going to mess up in a way that makes everything unravel or like makes it so I die. I'm gonna mess
Mhm.
up so severely that like it's not gonna be okay. It's not gonna be something that I can fix.
Right. And what I would say to you in that situation is, Jessica, think of something that you had to do that was really scary and hard. And how did you do that really scary and hard thing? What did that little part of Jessica say to the scary part of Jessica?
It's so funny. You're like my brain just keeps pulling me back to the negative. Like, yeah, I've done hard things and I messed up. Like I messed up certain things while doing it. And so like I'm going to mess something up. It's
Right, but
I will do the
we
hard
all
thing, but I will make a mistake.
yeah, we all make mistakes. So part of the problem that happens with ADHD is that we make a mistake when we're kids, and we're humiliated for those mistakes,
Yeah.
or isolated or excluded, and so then it makes it harder for us to make a mistake, or we make a mistake and something bad happens, like we maybe fail a test or we fail a course, whatever. But we have to treat ourselves with the perspective that everybody makes mistakes. And, you know, for in your case, while you're repelling, that your cortisol is going to really stimulate your whole brain to like be on target. That's why so many people with ADHD leave stuff to the last minute because they're in a panic about it. They're really worried. And then the adrenaline kicks in and it fuels the brain. It's just really unhealthy for the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Legacy says, speaking of anxiety, I launched a customer out of a wheelchair in my access van today. Hope your day was far less panicky today, Jessica and Sharon. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. And you know what? You made a mistake. It wasn't on purpose. And that's the thing we have to really think about, is that we're all doing the best we can with the tools and resources we have available to us in a given moment. And sometimes we're going to blow it. Like that's just part of living. It's just that when you feel like you blow it more times than not, then we get into that sort of catastrophizing thinking, instead of like, oops, this time I blew it, this time I didn't. I actually recommend to people, and I'm going to recommend to you, is I keep a journal at night and I write down a few good things that happened every day. Three, some days it's really a stretch, and some days I have like six things that I want to write down. But by just writing them down, it's interesting because I can go back and look and be like, wow, actually good things happen all the time. Then maybe it wasn't a huge thing, like I liked my haircut, but still that was a bright spot in my day.
Yeah, there's something somebody in the community told me about called the rose and the thorn. Have you heard of this
Yes.
exercise? Yeah, I love that. So if anybody doesn't know what that is, actually, can you explain it?
Yes. So, the rose and the thorn, it's funny. It comes from, this the group processing world, where you would come together and everyone would say like a high and a low from the day. And so some people felt like high and a low, oh, that's just not the right connotation. So we want to do, how about a rose and a thorn? And I was working with somebody and she's like, well, in our family, we do a happy and a crappy. I thought that was so funny. Like at
Great.
night at dinner, everyone goes around like, "Oh, what's your happy and your crappy?" So that also is a way to do it. I like the writing because I like to see it. Because otherwise, if it's not written down, it's not there for me to
Yeah.
access.
That's a great idea to do. And the rose and the thorn, yeah. So you can do it at the end of the day. You could write that one down too, of like what's something
Yes, you
that
could.
went really well that happened today, and then what's something that sucked. But there's variations of it too that I like, where it's like, okay, but also like, who was the gardener?
Mhm.
And that's the gardener is somebody who helped you that day,
Oh,
and
I love
sometimes that
that.
like that helps to
Yeah,
foster
that's so
gratitude.
great. That's
And
lovely.
and then you can even ask like, "What's the fertilizer?" So, like, what's something that was shitty at the time, but I know is actually a good thing? Like, it will make things grow, it will make things better.
Mhm.
It wasn't just like it sucked and it just sucked. It's like, "It sucked, but I'm glad I did it," or "I'm glad it happened because now it's
Mm.
gonna be better in the long run."
Yeah, that's great. I love that, Jessica. It's so beautiful. It sucked, but yeah, I'll be
Yeah.
glad in the long run.
Mhm. And that way it gives space for the negativity, but also space for the positivity, which is what we struggle with, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Um, ooh, okay. I like this one. I have a lot of anxiety around job applications because I'm afraid of getting the job and failing. Oh,
Ooh,
interesting. Not even of not getting the job, but I'm afraid of getting the job and failing at it. What can I do?
wow, that's so interesting. I was sure you were gonna say, "I'm afraid of not getting the job."
Yeah.
So interesting. So, in a way, kind of what you're talking about is imposter syndrome. Like, I'll get this job, the people will be, um, kind of wowed by me in my interview, or they'll be, they'll drink the Kool-Aid, and then when I show up and I really don't know what I'm doing, it's a problem. And I think that it's so interesting. I do believe that that comes from not wanting to ask for help. I had a client who had a job after college in computer science, and she was a person of color, and she, didn't always know what she was doing, and she had to ask for help. And she's like, I hate asking for help, and I don't want to fail, but I can't do this if I don't ask for help. So I think the thing for this person, what I would say is like, what does failure mean to you? Because is failure mean you have to ask for help? Then you're going to fail for sure. But if failure means you're going to get something wrong sometimes, then you're definitely going to fail. I would try to reframe it as, I'm afraid to get the job and then not be able to do the job in the way that I would like to. And I think that's actually more accurate. And then we can deal with some of the standards of perfection that you're holding yourself to, or which are
Ooh,
a little bit impossible.
you just named it. It's the standards of perfection because I have the same thing. It's an opportunity comes in through email, and like I am anxious about it because, and even with you, even having this live stream, I was like, oh no, she's gonna want to come on the channel. That's exciting, but also like she agreed to come on the channel. What if I let her down? That's what it really is.
Mhm.
It's like, what if I let somebody down?
Mhm.
And that is it's my perfectionism. Like I don't want to let anybody down. And I was so anxious because like we didn't have the promo ready for you as soon as I would have liked to have the promo, to put out. And like there's just I have such a high bar in my head for what performance should look like. And it is very close to perfection, if not perfection. And I have the same thing with friends. Like I'm anxious about like not if somebody won't like me, even it's what if they do like me and then we really click and now I have a friend and now I have somebody to disappoint, now I have somebody to let down.
Mm.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
that's really intense, because what you're talking about is um, this profound fear that somehow you're not gonna be able to sustain the job or the friendship, because eventually you will make a mistake. and then people will reject you or fire you or whatever. I think that in dealing with that, the best thing to do is to come clean. Like, hey, you know what? I'm really excited you're coming, but I have to let you know, Sharon, sometimes I do things last minute, and I know that can be frustrating. And it was like, okay, fine. Well, don't worry, we'll do it on our end, right? Or that you let someone know before a friend, that you struggle with time management, so you might not always be on time, and then you're going to let them know, as 15 minutes before you're supposed to meet at a certain time, how that's going. Because I think that what happens is that you're worried that they will feel sort of disrespected and then withdraw their affection or withdraw their support, when in reality, what we want is for people to be able um, to kind of lead a little bit with their vulnerability, not with excuses like, oh, I'm going to be late because I have ADHD, but rather, I'm someone who struggles with time management, and so I can be late. And I'm not proud of it. I'm working on it. And I'd like to just set up a method that works for you so that you're not feeling upset with me.
That's such a great idea because I think I just wrote this down. Like a good way to not let someone down is to do what you're talking about and set expectations ahead of time that you're not going to be perfect. I think so many times when it's a new job or a new friend or whatever, we haven't messed up yet. And so we're like, maybe I won't, right? Like, let me go in
Mhm.
thinking like this time I can be the person I'm supposed to be. This time I can be the perfect friend. This time I can be, this great employee. But if you know that you have a history of struggling with certain things that are going to upset somebody, like doing what's called social inoculation, like letting them know ahead of time can make it
Yes.
so that they're not so upset about it when it does happen. And that's such a it's just such a great idea, and it's not dissimilar to what I do when I get a new journal, which is I mess it up right away, because otherwise I have this illusion that I'm not going to mess it up and then I won't use it because I'm afraid of messing it up. If I just scribble it right away and mess it up right away, like then it's okay. I've already
Mhm.
adjusted my expectations for this to something that is reasonable for me. And I think, yeah, we can do the same thing for a job or a friendship or whatever the situation is. Like, let people know I do struggle with this thing and this is something I'm working on, but I'm not going to be perfect at it.
Yeah, there's a tool that we use sometimes with people, which is, you're in a group, um, and you're in a group situation, and you say, "Oh my God, is my face?" I say you say something, and then you say, "Oh my gosh," and is my face red? I'm sure my face is red because sometimes I really blush a lot, and people will say, "No, your face isn't red at all," so that later when your face is red, you can say, my face might be, they're like, oh, your face is red now. And then you can laugh about it. So, you kind of predict that something that might happen. And then when it happens, people are like, oh, there you go.
Yeah. No, that's great. And yeah, Dave in the comments says I've used under promise and over deliver. I try to remember that too, under promise and over deliver,
Mhm.
because sometimes in our eagerness to people please or to make somebody like us, we over promise up front and then we can't actually deliver on that. Or we over promise by our actions. Like we hyper focus on something at the beginning, which
Mhm.
sets up expectations that we can't possibly sustain.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I love that sort of you under promise. Like you set the bar lower for yourself and probably, what I would call a realistic expectation. And then when you show up on time, people are like, wow, look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So lower the bar is what I'm hearing. Um, this is a really interesting question. Does anxiety contribute to you may not know the answer to this, but I'm going to challenge you here. Does anxiety contribute to a shorter lifespan for those with ADHD?
I don't know. I know that Dr. Barkley and Dr. Margaret Sibley have done some research that has found that people with ADHD do have shorter lifespans, but I don't know how much of that has to do with anxiety. I do know that some of it has to do with substance abuse and risk taking,
Yeah.
and
Uh,
also healthcare, like not accessing healthcare consistently.
yeah. So I would imagine it depends on what the anxiety is preventing you from doing.
Yeah.
If the anxiety is keeping you from going to the dentist or going to the doctor, then I
Mhm.
imagine it could. Um, let's see. Gosh, there's so many good questions, you guys. I'm going to try and get to as many as we can. How can I not constantly be in survival mode with my anxiety. I'm always on edge.
Mhm. Thank you for that question. I think that's a really important question, and that goes back to this idea of differentiating when there's a genuine threat and when there's not. And so, part of what you're talking about is that your anxiety volume is at like 100 out of 10 all the time. And we want to try to drop it down. And the way that we're going to drop it, that I encourage you to drop it down is to really start to sort of think about one thing that you're most concerned about, maybe two. And then kind of get some reality checks going around the around those particular concerns, with friends or with coworkers, just to try to work on one thing at a time. Really, I prefer to work on one thing at a time because that's really what people can do. But we want to bring that volume down because your brain is focused on insecurity and uncertainty at every turn. We have to have some pockets of like exhaling. Like, where is it that you can exhale?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people are asking about anxiety and sleep, like having trouble falling asleep because your brain is spinning. And
Mhm.
yeah. Do you have any advice for that? Like, how do you handle it when your brain is like all the anxieties are popping up and keeping you from
Right.
sleeping?
So I have a little story to tell, if I may.
Yeah.
So I have a client I worked with, and she's quoted in my book, um, and what your ADHD child wishes you knew. And she said, I want to go to, she said, Chuck Sharon, I want to go to sleep, but there are these little voices in my head that are saying, nah, 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 what if you can't sleep? What if you can't sleep? And then I can't sleep, and then I don't go to sleep. And I thought, oh yeah, there you go. That's what it's like. That's exactly what it's like. Like, what if I can't sleep? What if I can't sleep? That's one set of those recurring thoughts. The second set is, oh my God, I have these things that I need to do that I haven't done. I want to remember them. In those cases, what I do, what I recommend, and I actually do this myself, is keep a pad of paper next to your bed and do a brain dump. What I do with younger kids, I call it a worry motel. So my friend Dr. Ted Plimpton taught me this. So you can take a shoebox, decorate it, and then like write your worries down on pieces of paper or just one piece of paper. Drop them in the shoebox. For younger kids, they might want to put their like stuffies around it to protect the worries to make sure they're safe at night. Most adults are like, let me just get this out of my head. And then in the morning, you can decide which of the ones you want to pick up.
What about the failures? The like, oh God, I'm gonna fail at this. I'm gonna fail at that. Like everyone I love is gonna die. Heat death of the universe. Like where you just start catastrophizing
Then you
everything.
have to do the what if one at a time. What if everyone I love dies? Okay, then what's going to happen? Well, I guess I'll have to go live in a different community or with Aunt Betsy. So, and then what would that be like? And blah blah blah. So, we have to this is that part of self regulation, of metacognition, that we have to understand. We are engaging in a what if process to avoid something. What's underneath? What are you really afraid of? Because you're not afraid if the world is going to die, blah 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 blah. If you maybe you are, but there's something else that's really underneath. What is it I'm afraid of? I'm afraid that I'm not going to manage a situation. I'm not going to show up. I'm not going to be able to pull through. And that's the thing that we want to address, not all of this clutter. Because the brain, all of these what ifs just clutter up the brain. That's
Yeah,
like,
that's exactly what it is a lot of time. Like, I'm afraid I'm not gonna be able to handle it. I'm afraid I'm not gonna be able to manage. And I think with especially with ADHD, you have had situations that did overwhelm your ability to manage, that did overwhelm your ability to cope. And so they feed into it. So that
that's right.
that
And so that's what, your worry says to you. You can't handle it. Blah blah blah, and you can't handle it, which is why you have to have a statement that says, actually, in this situation, I was worried and I did these things and I did handle it.
yeah. So on that note, does ADHD fuel anxiety or does anxiety fuel ADHD or both?
I would say yes, both. I mean, I think that the ADHD brain is susceptible to anxiety, and that it has to do with that some of the structures in the brain are smaller, and also how sort of the wiring of the brain. So ADHD brains are sort of prone to more anxiety. But I think that, I think that anxiety, if you are anxious and you have ADHD, it's a beautiful music that they're creating up there for you.
Yeah. Sorry, let me answer a question really quick. Why am I typing? I can talk. Yeah, somebody asked if you can ask questions in super chat. You absolutely can. So anybody who wants to donate to the channel, who can afford to, who would like to, we are prioritizing those questions first, just because this is what allows us to do things like this. So um, yeah. Aw, this one was just thank you. This was a donation and just like a gratitude. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you.
I appreciate you. Um, w- uh, gosh, there's so many here.
I
Oh,
just
how
want
can
to
I?
appreciate Jessica for a minute. Can we just appreciate Jessica? So much love. Like, you've done something that has really changed the whole ADHD community, and you've made you've made having ADHD something real, and something to be not ashamed of, but to also be able to talk about the things that do make you feel ashamed. Like, you've just sort of normalized it in this fantastic way.
Thank you. That means a lot to me because that was my biggest goal, was to like make the invisible obstacles we keep tripping over visible, so that we don't keep blaming ourselves for stuff that is just how our brains work, or sometimes how inaccessible the world can be to us. And to me, it's not something to be ashamed of. This is just how our brains are made. And making it kind of a matter of fact thing, like I like to think of it
Mhm,
like, if you learn to read error codes on a printer, it's a morally neutral thing. Like, okay, I know, printer's out of paper, great, it needs paper, right? I'm running into working memory issues because my working memory is a relative area of weakness for me. So like, great,
mhm,
I'm going to need a piece of paper to write it down. Making it a morally neutral thing has been a really big thing for me, because I used to feel so deeply ashamed and such a like a bad
mm,
person for struggling with this
mhm,
stuff for such a long time. So thank you for
mhm.
saying that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Iolair. Thank you for the donation. That's really sweet. Okay. Cool. I'm gonna keep it asking questions. Shrey asked, I recently saw a video go viral about a woman with time blindness. I felt really bad for her, and I was wondering, apart from dealing with ourselves, what reasonable accommodation a company could give.
Mm, such a good question. I think a company can help people with time blindness by actually, not just creating, a plan for how to do something, but having time markers in a plan and some estimation of how long this task will take, and when this one is due. Like, for me, one this happens for me because I struggle with time. People say, "Oh, can you write this thing?" And I'm like, for me, and I'll say, "Yes. When do you want it?" Because if I don't have a deadline for when that thing is due, I'm not going to do it. It'll just sit.
Yeah,
Because there's
shorter deadlines help a lot too. I told my editor when I was writing the book, like, I need to be done with this chapter by this date, and like then we need to
exactly
meet. So not even just a deadline, but like an actual sort of accountability. So
right.
sometimes I was up real late Wednesday night because I knew that Thursday morning we were meeting. But that kept me from writing an entire book at the last minute.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. So to actually work with the brain of the person that you have instead of work against it. So, okay, what sort of things will help you get this on time?
Yeah.
And some managers might feel like, well, that's ridiculous. I'm not supposed to do that. This person's an adult. And I would say that isn't, you're wrong.
At that point, I would send them to askjan.org. I'll drop that in the chat. Askjan.org is a fantastic site that talks about different conditions. You can look it up by disability, A to Z, and so you can look for ADHD and look for the specific impairments, or you can look by work task and see what accommodations might make sense. And they also have a free chat and a free phone line. They know all the laws in the United States, but you can actually call from any country in the world or chat from any country in the world, and they will help you out.
So good. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. How can I catch that I'm anxious before it gets really bad? And are there some go-to strategies to interrupt myself?
Great question. So, usually, again, there are these bodily signals that you're getting upset. And when you have those bodily signals, that is the moment when you must call for a stop. And a stop in the action can be going to the bathroom washing your face and your hands, saying something encouraging to yourself. It can be small, it can be that you can do in public. It could be, "Hey, you know what? I just wanna get a drink of water, I'll be right back." But when you start to feel that tightness in your chest, or maybe, the tone of your voice rises, or you're feeling like your stomach really hurts and you're feeling sick, that is the time to please call a pause in the action. And you can call that pause in the action anytime, because everybody has to go to the bathroom. You can say, that's a really good point. Excuse me, I just want to use the bathroom. I'll be right back. I'll get back to you. I think that it's important that you ask for what you need, um, because you're the only one who can soothe yourself. And so you have to follow the bodily signals. Like maybe you're starting to feel hot and you're perspiring, and you notice you're tapping, and you're like, time to go to the bathroom.
That's a really great point. I think sometimes we push ourselves to stay in a situation until like we absolutely can't anymore, but by then it's kind of too late. So
Yeah.
the idea of calling a pause in the action before it gets to that point makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Um, Jeff Bennett, thank you so much. Oh, I appreciate you. Thank you. And Joshiki asks, how do you cope with the anxiety of constantly feeling you need to be disciplined to manage your ADHD and trying to give yourself a break when everything seems to fall apart if you do be kind? Ooh, I hear that a lot from my community where like they have to be hard on themselves because if they're not, then they won't do the thing. But that, I mean, we know creates more issues and more anxiety around stuff in the future. So
I don't think being hard on yourself. I mean, this is a tough question for me because I am hard on myself. It's something that I've been doing for multiple years, many years, and I wish I weren't. Um, so it's kind of, I'm like the pot calling the kettle black, right? Here I am talking about the thing that's very hard for me. And this has to do with the standards that I set for myself. It goes back to that bar. Um, but I know that when I am listening to that part of myself that is wagging his finger at me, it has a name. I think it's important to name that part, that negative, critical part of yourself. If you're out there, give it a name, and name the part of you that is the antidote to that. So when Poindexter comes up and starts to wave his finger at me about what I should do, or, how this isn't very good, or what mistakes that I made, I have to really talk to, really bring in the courageous, joyous part of myself, and have her say something back to that. So it's kind of an internal dialogue in a way. The negative part is saying this terrible thing, but when the negative part says that terrible thing, for me, I just want to go like this, right? I just want to go into like child's pose from yoga, and I'm staying there. But when the part of me that is um, courageous and joyful can say, "Hey, I know you feel stuck, but I believe in you. I know you'll figure it out." I'm going to listen to that a lot. That's going to make me feel a lot better. You know, my friend's mother died a while ago, and I was talking to his son, who was a senior in high school, I think, at the time. And I said, "Well, what was special to you about your grandmother?" And he's Jewish. I'm Jewish. And he said, "Well, it was the bubby pat." And so, for those of you who don't know what a bubby is a Jewish grandmother. And I said, "Well, what is the bubby pat?" And he said, "Bubby, when I was having a hard time, Bubby would take my hand and she would rub my hand and she would say, 'You know, it sounds like you're confused, but I have total faith that you're going to figure this out and and move forward.'" And I looked at him and I was like, "Did your grandmother really say that?" And he said, "Yes, she did." And I thought, "Oh my God, not my family. Like, that was not what I grew up with, right?" But that's what I've decided I'm going to be to my grandchildren, the bubby. You
that's
know,
really sweet. I think the first time I heard you talk about that, it was something along the lines, and it stuck with me. Like, whatever it is, I know you can get through it. And I'm
yes.
just like, that's amazing because it doesn't diminish what the stressor is. It just it reminds you that you are capable of handling it, which I think is what we all need to hear when we're really anxious. Um, a lot of people are asking, how do stimulants and anxiety feed off each other? I only take a non-stimulant because I wouldn't want the excessive anxiety if it is the cause of anxiety other than normal ADHD. So I know that there's been some mixed research on this, whether or not stimulants actually increase anxiety in
Mhm.
ADHD. Do you know? Do you know?
That's exactly right. There is mixed research. It depends. And I wish I could say it was a one size fits all kind of a recipe, but it's not, because people have different responses to their medications. And so for some people, taking a stimulant can help reduce the anxiety, and for other people, it does the opposite. So I don't have a magic solution here. I'm sorry.
No, but I can speak to it a little bit. So I've noticed my anxiety is better if I'm on meds, but not if my meds dose is too high. So
Hmm.
it really does depend, but it's also dose dependent and it's also specific medication dependent. So some medications, some stimulant medications, I am more anxious on than others as well. So it depends on
Yes.
the dose, it depends on the medication. It and one of the nice things about stimulants is if you try them, they're out of your system really quickly. So it
Mhm.
is something that if you wanted to experiment with, you could and see, and you would start out, generally you want to start out at a low dose and
Mhm.
see how you do, and if the anxiety is is too much, then you go, okay, that's not the right medication for me. If the anxiety is fine, then you can go up a little bit and see how you do, and you try and find a balance. So there is a medication dose that like works really well for my ADHD, but is not okay for my anxiety, and so I'm a little bit below that threshold.
Mhm.
And is my anxiety or my ADHD perfectly managed? No, but I'm not as anxious on that dose. So that is
Mhm.
what we do.
I'm so
So
glad that you found that, Jessica, because it's such a hard place for a lot of people to get to. It takes a lot of trial and error, and people give up. They're frustrated, and it's a frustrating process.
medication is a frustrating process. And I'm actually
Mhm.
not medicated today because I had to change up my dose because of another medical stuff thing that I'm going through. And now I suddenly can't get my medication because now it needs a new prior authorization from my
Yeah.
insurance company. So like it's even for me, it's still a battle to get my meds and find the right
Mhm.
meds and the right dose and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for those who it works for, it's very effective. So for a lot of us, it's worth it, but it is a pain. Um, let's see. Gosh, I want to answer all of them, but I also want to be respectful of time. So we had planned 90 minutes for this. Sharon, how are you feeling? Do you want to answer a few more or
I'm
do you want to
doing
wrap
okay.
up?
Yeah, I can answer a few more. Maybe go to another until 3:45. Sorry. Yeah, 3:45 Eastern Standard Time. So.
Great. Okay. So we're gonna do a lightning round here.
Ah!
And there are other questions that are really, really good that I haven't gotten to. So we may be able to answer those in future videos. We may be
Yes.
able to do another live stream or
Sure.
a short to answer some of these.
Mhm.
Um, let's see. Okay. Does ADHD and its management lead to anxiety, or are they truly separate issues? So is it always that you have ADHD and that's why you have anxiety, or sometimes would you have had the anxiety anyway?
Um, well, it's not one or the other, really. Like, you have ADHD. Some people with ADHD don't have a lot of anxiety. Some people with ADHD tend more towards the depression end of things, or sometimes people with ADHD, um, uh, you know, uh, have specific types of anxiety rather than kind of general anxiety. So I don't think it goes either way. I think you can be anxious and not have ADHD. There are plenty of people like that. But we do see higher levels of anxiety among people with ADHD.
Okay. And then my understanding too is that there's primary and secondary. So there's primary anxiety, which means like you were predisposed to it. You may have had anxiety regardless. And then there's secondary, where the anxiety is secondary to the ADHD. Is that correct?
So I don't, yeah, I mean, I think that would be hard for me to sort of support, to be honest, because we know that ADHD is a biologically based condition, right? And so, 57 or 50 some percent of adults who have ADHD have kids with ADHD. And we know that there's a sort of a genetic predisposition for anxiety, but it's not an inherited trait as we see with depression or bipolar disorder, et cetera, or with ADHD itself. So I think that uh, you know you can have ADHD as the biological inherited type. Someone in your family may have it, generally in your extended family, and if you are adopted, we don't know, but that would be likely. Um, and some people have developed ADHD because there are complications at birth, or the mother was using substances or whatever it is. Okay, in those cases, I mean, I think that the chicken and the egg question is just not that useful. It's like, which do you have first? You have this, you have that. Does it really matter? Because this is where you are right now. And
Fair.
all like, it's like people ask me, well, is it ADHD or is it adolescence? And I'm like, yes, it's a mix of both. And trying to separate it out, I think just it's just not fruitful. Like it doesn't lead to solutions that help you live your life more, you know, fully.
That makes sense. Um, Another person asked, it sounds like we're talking about negative anxiety. Isn't there positive anxiety?
Yes, and I did talk about that. And the thing is, we want to remember that anxiety is sort of the physiological how we're responding. Really, the core of anxiety, what we're talking about, is worry. And there is productive worry that helps us get stuff done. Like, oh, Jessica was saying that she has her second round of edits due on her book, and she, may have some worry about that, which then causes some anxiety, agitation. And so, but that agitation actually serves a purpose because you're going to be more likely to get it done versus toxic worry or poisonous worry, which is all about things you can't control. Like, oh my God, I'm taking an airplane, it might crash. It might. I mean, the probability is very low, but it could. Or it's a thunderstorm, thunder and lightning, or how my house could get struck by lightning. What am I going to do then? Things like that. And that kind of poisonous worry is where worriers get stuck because it's a lack of a sense of control. I don't know what's going to happen in this situation, and I don't feel like I have any control. In productive worry, we have a sense of control. We have a sense of autonomy. But when we don't, we can get into panic in both of those instances.
Okay. That makes sense. Several people are asking, like, how do you, is essentially, how do you stop from spiraling? How do you stop repetitive thought looping? The rumination caused from anxiety. I constantly overthink and worry in conversation. And sometimes, one person said about my own anxiety, which is counterproductive to stopping it. So, like, how do you stop that? Like, how do you interrupt
Right.
rumination?
Right. Well, Dr. Reed Wilson has written a book called Stopping the Noise in Your Head. And he also has a wonderful website that I can't remember what it's called, but it's REID Wilson. And he has a lot of these really cute videos on the website, and of course, lots of articles and information. But what he talks about is that, you know, um, it's this idea of those parts. Like you have a part of yourself that is telling you these negative things and is basically running wild in your brain. And then you have another part of yourself that actually knows what you might want to say to kind of to that part, which is like, hey, you're just running wild here, you're amped up, we got to bring you down. This is what we're going to do. And so we have to have some phrases that we can say to ourselves in those moments, because what we do is we turn to other people to help us, and other people can't help us because the thing is, it's that positive part of yourself. I don't know if you want to call it smart Jessica, or savvy Jessica, or whatever you want to call her. um, one of my clients calls him, smart Steve, or smart, the other one calls it healthy John, because it's about food and making healthy choices. So whatever it is, but that part has to have some phrases to say back to the other part when this is happening.
That's
um,
great. I'm going to try and get through two more questions really quickly. One is right up your alley. My 11-year-old is watching this live with me. Her question is, what's the best thing that can help her when she stonewalls?
when she stonewalls, like nothing's going to help, I
I'm not
guess.
sure. That's the rest of it,
Yeah.
but I'm
So
guessing shuts down and won't talk
yeah,
too.
okay, so there's stonewalling, like nothing's gonna help no matter what you're gonna do, and the other is shutting down and sort of disappearing. And so when you're shutting down and disappearing, what's happened is that your brain is so flooded by the fear of what's going to happen that you can't actually imagine something else, right? And so we have to try to remind you of sometimes when you were in a situation that frightened or upset you and how that time is like this time because your brain is shutting down because it's scared and it doesn't think that there's any way to deal with that fear. So it doesn't believe that someone can help you. And really, what we have to do instead of having someone help you or tell you what to do is to have you work with your mom or maybe a therapist or somebody to figure out a solution that makes sense to you. So you're in charge.
I love that. I feel like we keep coming back to that. Like, what can you do for you? Because,
Correct.
other
Right.
people are not going to be able to help you as much as you can help you. Um,
Right. We
and
can we because what happens is that you'll be afraid of something or you'll have a worry and people will do two things. They minimize it. Well, that's not going to be such a big deal. Or they dismiss it. Um, they minimize it and dismiss it, excuse me. That's not a big deal. I don't see why you're worried about that. Or they try to reassure you, you'll be fine. So either you'll be fine or that's not a big deal are things that do not help. Anxiety loves it. So if you want to see anxiety grow, please say those things.
so that leads into the final question, which is how should a loved one help, especially if the anxious person doesn't know what to do?
Whatever it is, I know you can get through it. Your anxiety is saying blah, 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 and you can't handle it. What is it that you want? What is your goal? And what are you willing to try? What risk, small risk, are you willing to take? And I'm here. I love you. I believe in you. And I remember when you took this risk and when you took that risk.
I love that. Thank you so much. This was super helpful. Thank you to everyone who donated as well. I didn't thank a couple of you. ADHD Hyperdrive says, "Thank Jessica. I can't thank you and the How to ADHD team enough. I recently got diagnosed with ADHD, and your videos have given me the perspective and self compassion to keep going. I didn't eat today and can't concentrate on anything, but I'm in good company." Yeah, there's a lot of us in that boat. Thank you so much for supporting what we're doing here. And then, oh, I'm so sorry. There's one more question along with the donation, if that's okay, Sharon.
Yep. Mhm.
Last one. Question: do you think those of us that might need a break and go on disability should feel like we are less than? I know we can't help it, but still people pleaser, twice exceptional, people crisis.
No. You know what? Maybe you need a sick and tired break. Like, sometimes, people, I actually work with some students and adults who sometimes just need to take a day. One of my clients is like, can I please not go to school one day a month? I just want to not go to school one day a month. And I set up with her parents and she had a sick and tired day, one per month. She called it when she wanted it. It couldn't be on a day when she had a test. It really made a difference. So if you're going on disability, you need a break. And there's nothing wrong with that because you may come out the other side a lot stronger, less burnt out, and ready to actually serve the world with whatever wonderful things you have to offer.
And this is where I really lean into the social model of disability. It's easy to feel less than, but it's really important to know that if you are disabled in your environment, it is because you are in an environment that does not understand or accommodate your needs.
Mhm.
Essentially, we live in a society that accommodates most humans' needs pretty well. I would be disabled if I did not have access to an optometrist and was able to get contacts. I'm very, very nearsighted, but because we live in a world that does accommodate that, I can see. We have some of these invisible or unseen disabilities are things that are not accommodated for very well in our society. And that's not any sort of like, there's, I don't know, something less than about us. It's we live in a society that doesn't accommodate that very well right now. So I don't know if that helps you, but it's what helps me when I when I start to feel less than in those situations is knowing
Mm.
that it's really the environment that is disabling more than anything.
That's
Um,
beautiful. That's beautiful.
So I will leave it there. Thank you so much. There were so many more questions than we could possibly get to. So we will, if anybody's interested in having Dr. Saline back, let us know in the comments, and we will show them to her and see if we can get her to come on again. And I think we will also do a lecture style video.
Okay.
I'll collaborate with her on how
Mhm.
to talk back to anxiety, like what we should be saying during anxiety, because I think that that would
Yeah.
be very helpful.
I think that would be great, and I would be a great honor to come back anytime. And I just want to remember to for you all to get your downloadable because it will summarize the things that we talked about, so you don't have to worry about keeping them in your head.
Yeah. The stream will be available tomorrow and the next day and the next day. After this, it will just live on the channel so you can find it again. And in the link for that downloadable is in the description below. It will also give you access to her twice monthly newsletter. And she has some really great things that she talks about there as well. So, yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Do you want to say bye, brains, with me?
Yes, I do.
All right. One, two, three. Bye,
Bye,
brains.
brains.